My new boss fired me the moment he took over the company. He didn't know he would lose everything. I was at my desk on a Wednesday morning, elbow deep in financial summaries and scheduling software, when Nathan Hale strode in flanked by two executive assistants. The atmosphere was charged with the tension of a regime change. Everyone had heard rumors of restructuring, but no one anticipated the axe to fall so publicly. I looked up from my computer to see him, tall and imposing in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He met my eyes, paused, and then in a single breath declared, "You, pack your things. You're done here." At first, I wasn't sure if he was joking. Maybe this was some twisted icebreaker or dramatic introduction, but the looks on my colleagues' faces told me otherwise. An audible gasp spread through our cubicle cluster as I rose from my chair, heart pounding like thunder in my ears. My mouth felt dry, my temples pulsed with a mix of humiliation and fury. People were staring, some with pity, others with dread, because if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. At that moment, Nathan's expression hardened into a satisfied smirk. I tried to speak, but the words lodged in my throat, blocked by a flood of adrenalized shock. This wasn't just a pink slip passed discreetly in an envelope, it was a public spectacle. My coworkers froze at their desks, unwilling to move, uncertain if stepping forward to defend me might cost them their own positions. The entire office floor felt like a stage under a spotlight, and Nathan Hale stood center stage with a brazen confidence that I found both surreal and infuriating. The computers continued to hum, the phones continued to ring, but no one answered. Everyone was too busy watching me lose my job in real time. Before I could collect my thoughts, he waved a dismissive hand. "Security will help you gather your things," he said. My chest tightened, a flush creeping up my neck. I'd never been fired before, certainly not in such a humiliating manner. Part of me screamed to fight back, but a stronger instinct urged me to remain composed. A small group of security personnel hovered nearby, unsure how to proceed. As if to punctuate the moment, Nathan's lips curled into another smug smirk, as though he took pleasure in my shock and the fear rippling through the room. My mind whirled in a kaleidoscope of disbelief and anger. I'd given years of my life to this company, poured in countless hours, managed crisis after crisis. Every fiber in me wanted to lash out, but I knew deep down that showing weakness or desperation would only give Nathan more ammunition. Instead, I inhaled a shaky breath, forced a numb sort of calm over myself, and reminded my trembling limbs that this was just a setback, not the end. I looked around the cubicles, catching sight of coworkers who had trusted my leadership in multiple projects, many who had once asked me for guidance. Their eyes pleaded with me to speak up or defend myself, but I sensed there was no benefit in a dramatic protest. Nathan Hale had clearly decided to make me a scapegoat, to solidify his dominance on day one. Begging wouldn't change his mind. Crying wouldn't earn me any dignity. So I stood, quietly, my heart pounding like a bass drum. I closed the folder I'd been working on, slid a few personal items from my drawer into my handbag, and slowly shut down my computer. All the while, I felt Nathan's gaze burn into the back of my head. I reminded myself who I was, a professional, a problem solver, someone who had never needed to rely on cheap theatrics to prove my worth. Being fired in front of everyone was humiliating, yes, but it didn't change my character or my capabilities. If anything, that moment fueled a steely resolve in me. If Nathan Hale believed I was disposable, he'd soon discover just how deeply rooted my contributions to this organization were, and how lethal it could be to dismiss the person who knew its inner workings better than anyone. He didn't realize how much I knew. He just walked in the door. He had no grasp of the history, the subtle balances, or the quiet alliances that made the company function smoothly. He saw only spreadsheets and titles, believing he could wipe the slate clean and insert his brand of corporate domination. But I wasn't some entry-level minion. I had been personally groomed by the previous CEO, entrusted with sensitive projects. I held back the urge to glare at him, because I knew that look would only confirm I'd been wounded. Instead, I presented a mask of impassive composure. Let him think I was meek. Let him think he'd won. In the minutes that followed, as I placed a family photo and a few personal trinkets into a cardboard box, I couldn't help but reflect on the path that led me here. I started with the company fresh out of grad school. Back then, our office was small and scrappy. We had a visionary CEO named William Fowler, who had a genuine passion for both the product we developed and the people who made it happen. He noticed my determination early on. I would stay late to solve finance and logistics puzzles that others gave up on. I'd volunteer for tasks outside my scope, hungry to learn, to contribute. Over the years, I climbed the ranks, from junior analyst to operations manager to director of strategic planning. Fowler often joked that I might take over his job one day. He was the type of leader who balanced ambition with empathy. When the company was acquired by a larger conglomerate, Fowler remained the CEO, though he reported to the parent group. That's when the board started whispering about bigger expansions, new leadership synergy, and next-level strategy. Nathan Hale was hired from some global consulting behemoth, rumored to be unstoppable in aggressive takeovers. I knew the moment I heard Nathan's name that change was coming fast and hard. Nathan Hale was a legend in certain corners of the corporate world. A flashy, high-powered figure known for downsizing teams ruthlessly, implementing sharp cost-cutting measures, and strong-arming deals that favored shareholders at the expense of staff. He commanded a room with an entitled aura that said, "I conquer." When the parent company announced him as the new boss, I felt a ripple of fear pass through my team. His approach clashed violently with the culture Fowler had built. Still, I believed my track record and the relationships I'd cultivated would protect me, or at least grant me an audience. I was loyal, resourceful, and the staff respected me. But none of that mattered to Nathan. He saw me as part of the old guard, someone who might challenge his authority or question his tactics. And so, with one swift move, he decided to eradicate me. He did it openly, making sure everyone understood who was in charge now. Even in that moment, as my heart clenched, I couldn't help but sense that his brash move was a sign he was overcompensating. Maybe on some level he was afraid of what I represented. What Nathan didn't know, and what was about to shake up his entire plan, was that William Fowler had approached me several weeks earlier with an offer that felt like a dream. The parent company was expanding its upper management team, and Fowler believed I was the perfect candidate for a newly formed position overseeing strategic integration across multiple branches. It would be a massive promotion, reporting to a senior executive at the parent conglomerate. Hadn't accepted yet, because part of me was torn about leaving the coworkers and company I had grown to love. But the offer was real, and the contract was waiting for my signature. I remember Fowler's words, "You've proven your loyalty, your expertise, and your leadership. I trust you to elevate this entire operation if you step into this new role. But if your heart says stay, I respect that too. Just know the door is wide open." I was still weighing my options, uncertain if I wanted to move away from the day-to-day environment I'd helped build. Then, everything changed when Nathan strolled in with his big talk, his fancy suits, and his absolute disregard for the people who had given their all to this place. The memory of Fowler's offer flashed through my mind as I walked out of the building, box in hand, security personnel quietly trailing behind me. My cheeks burned with a mix of embarrassment and adrenaline, but a new thought crystallized. I could accept that promotion now without any guilt. After all, I was no longer bound by my loyalty to a company that had just discarded me. Ironically, the very act of firing me had freed me to pursue a greater destiny, one with more resources, more authority, and a direct line to the people who oversaw Nathan Hale. Standing by my car, I felt my phone buzz. It was a text from Fowler. He'd already heard the news. Office gossip travels at the speed of light, and he simply wrote, "Are you okay? Let me know if you need anything." The concern in his words sparked a new wave of emotion. I allowed myself a single moment of doubt, a deep breath to steady my racing heart. Then I texted him back, "I'm accepting the position. Let's finalize it ASAP." My finger hovered over send for a split second before I tapped it. That single decision was the pivot upon which everything else would turn. Driving away from the office, I was still shaking, but my mind was on fire with possibilities. Nathan thought he'd stripped me of power. He had no clue that by day's end, I would be occupying a higher perch in the corporate hierarchy. The promotion wasn't just a new title. It came with a network of resources, advanced budgets, and direct communication lines to board members who were far above Nathan's pay grade. If I'd been uncertain about the move before, now I was fully committed. I called Fowler and we spoke for nearly an hour. He apologized for not warning me about Nathan's aggressive tactics. He'd been sidelined in the decision-making process more than he cared to admit. But he was thrilled I was taking the parent company role. He believed that once the dust settled, I could bring real improvements across all regional offices. He cautioned me that Nathan was cunning and would likely try to sabotage my new position if he learned of it. We both agreed to keep the transition quiet until the paperwork was official. My heart hammered, but now it wasn't solely from anger or fear. There was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something big was about to unfold. The first day in my new role was surreal. I walked into the parent company's gleaming headquarters, a modern skyscraper with marble floors and a buzzing lobby filled with high-caliber professionals from every discipline. My new boss at the parent organization, Elaine West, welcomed me with genuine enthusiasm. She handed me a stack of briefings about each subsidiary, including the one Nathan now led. As I skimmed the documents, I realized just how intricately I knew that operation, from the critical renewal deadlines to the nuances in vendor partnerships. Elaine asked, "How quickly do you think you can assess these companies' strategic needs?" I smiled, a slow confidence replacing the hurt I'd felt just days ago. "I already have an outline in my head," I replied. Over the next few weeks, I quietly began funneling my expertise into the subsidiary evaluations, paying special attention to the office Nathan was now running. I didn't sabotage anything directly. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where the cracks would start to appear if he bulldozed through policies without proper understanding. All the while, I maintained a polite distance. My name was circulated in memos, but I made no direct contact with Nathan or my former coworkers yet. Let him believe I'd vanished. Back at my old office, from what I heard through discreet channels, Nathan was fumbling. He held daily meetings that lasted for hours, unveiling grand strategies that often contradicted one another. He demanded faster workflows without allocating proper resources. He wanted to slash vendor costs but hadn't reviewed the complex contracts we had in place, contracts I had negotiated personally. He was walking into a minefield he'd built for himself, all while assuming his flashy brand of leadership would inspire awe. I anticipated it all. Deadlines for key client renewals that required personal rapport, an outdated software system that needed manual overrides to prevent data loss, long-standing vendor relations based on trust. Nathan hadn't bothered to understand any of it. I didn't have to send an anonymous tip or sabotage him. I simply made sure that I was prepared to document each failure from my vantage point at the parent company. Every missed renewal, every vendor complaint, every frustrated manager's resignation letter crossed my desk. I compiled a thorough dossier of issues and outcomes. I felt a twinge of guilt for watching my former colleagues suffer the consequences of Nathan's arrogance. But I also believed that in time, justice would be served. The first major domino to fall involved our biggest client, Orion Tech. They had a contract renewal worth millions, a cornerstone of the company's revenue stream. Historically, I nurtured that relationship meticulously. Regular check-ins, personal touches, ensuring their technical specs were fully met. With me gone, Nathan assumed Orion would just sign on the dotted line again. Instead, Orion's executives grew uneasy. They tried reaching out to me for clarity, only to discover I was no longer with the company. Nathan dismissed their concerns, bragging that he could find bigger, better clients if Orion chose to walk. News of that arrogance rippled up the chain. Within a month, Orion pulled out, citing a lack of trust. The entire floor was in chaos. A friend of mine from accounting texted me, "Nathan is livid. He's blaming everyone except himself." It stung to see a relationship I had carefully built get demolished. But it was also a pivotal warning to the board about how toxic Nathan's leadership style could be. As if to add gasoline to the fire, vendor relations deteriorated. Some partners insisted on higher rates, claiming the new administration was too volatile. Projects stalled. And then, quite predictably, a few senior managers decided they'd had enough. I watched from my new desk as the resignation letters appeared in the corporate communication system. Two managers I had worked with closely, both brilliant and loyal, handed in their notices. They cited poor leadership and an unhealthy work environment. Rumors were swirling about Nathan's temper, how he held demeaning late-night conference calls and demanded instant results from tasks that took days of careful coordination. Then came the leaked video. An intern, apparently tired of being a target for Nathan's fury, recorded one of his outbursts. In the footage, Nathan could be seen berating the intern over a minor scheduling mistake, cursing and making disparaging remarks about incompetent staff. Worse, he let slip a few lines about how easy it is to fire people who get in my way, referencing my own termination. That video found its way to the internal messaging boards and quickly circulated beyond the office walls. No one could trace the leak directly to me, and in truth, I hadn't orchestrated that. But I wasn't sorry it came to light. The moment the video reached Elaine's desk at the parent company, a flurry of damage control measures began. I was asked to sit in on high-level discussions about the Nathan Hale problem. With each passing day, Nathan's empire within our subsidiary was collapsing around him, and he had no idea that I was now part of the upper echelon, evaluating his every move. I didn't crow about it. I took no pleasure in people losing jobs or clients leaving. But I couldn't deny a sense of vindication. Perhaps the sweetest irony was that I never had to utter a single word against him. I simply let events unfold, each misstep a direct product of his own arrogance. Elaine periodically asked for updates. "We need a thorough report on the sustainability of that office," she'd say, eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of concern and quiet admiration. I provided her with meticulously annotated data, showing exactly how the branch was hemorrhaging money and morale under Nathan's rule. The leaked video was the final blow to his reputation in the eyes of senior executives. Fowler, for his part, stayed out of the fray, but I knew he was relieved that the truth was surfacing on its own. While the company's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, I found myself on the verge of an even bigger responsibility. Overseeing the regional evaluations for all of our subsidiaries, including Nathan's. My promotion happened quietly. An internal memo announced that I was now the Regional Director of Strategic Assessments, reporting directly to Elaine West. The title itself was a mouthful, but the power it granted was undeniable. I had the authority to recommend branch closures, reorganizations, or expansions, and my recommendations carried significant weight with the board. It was a role that put me, in essence, on par with many of the newly appointed CEOs, including Nathan Hale. The next time I set foot in my old office building, it was on official business. I came with a small team of analysts to conduct a thorough evaluation, the same process that was happening at other branches. The difference here was that everyone in my old office knew me. Some greeted me with relieved smiles, others with nervous glances, unsure where my allegiance now lay. I maintained a composed, polite demeanor, greeting former colleagues by name. It felt surreal to walk those same hallways, once filled with my daily routines, now in the capacity of an external evaluator, with the power to recommend the branch's closure. Nathan was informed of my arrival only that morning. The tension in the air was electric when I requested a private meeting with him. Nathan's posture was rigid when I entered his office, my old seat of power, ironically. He didn't look quite as cocky as the day he fired me. His eyes flicked over me, as though trying to reconcile the memory of that humiliating showdown with the presence of this newly minted executive. My team stood behind me, each one a silent testament to the authority I now wielded. I offered a cordial handshake, which he accepted stiffly. "Thank you for making time, Mr. Hale," I said, my voice deliberately measured. His gaze darted to the ID badge that showcased my new title and the logo of the parent company. The lines on his forehead deepened. "Yes, well, I hadn't realized you'd been promoted." He bit off the last word like it tasted bitter. I just nodded, inviting him to begin the customary introduction about the branch's current performance. He stumbled through slides of sales projections, tried to spin the recent losses as temporary adjustments due to employee turnover. I noticed the sweat beading at his temple. I listened calmly, taking notes, occasionally asking pointed questions about client retention strategies. Behind me, I could sense my team's controlled surprise at how unprepared he truly was. After an hour of forced pleasantries and half-truths, we wrapped the official assessment. I thanked him for the briefing and told him we'd continue our evaluations by interviewing key staff. Nathan tried to salvage some sense of command, insisting that he'd personally guide us to the best employees. But I politely informed him we had our own schedule. The power dynamic had inverted so sharply that you could almost taste the tension in the room. As we left his office, I locked eyes with him for a moment. There was a flicker of recognition, a silent admission that he'd underestimated me catastrophically. In that instant, I saw fear in his stare, as if he grasped the precarious position he was now in. I wasn't gloating. I felt more sadness than triumph, remembering how this company once thrived under collaborative, empathetic leadership. But I also knew that I had a duty to the parent organization and to my own career to deliver an honest verdict on the viability of Nathan's branch. By the day's end, we had spoken to numerous employees, collected reams of data, and identified glaring operational gaps. My final step was to schedule a private meeting with Nathan for the following morning, one that would seal his fate. Nathan's request for a private meeting that evening came through my assistant. Apparently, he wanted to speak before the next day's official review. I agreed, though I knew it was likely an act of desperation. The conference room was empty when I arrived. He showed up a few minutes later, his tie loosened, carrying a folder of documents. I could tell he was rattled. This was no longer the self-assured alpha male that had fired me so publicly. He cleared his throat and began with a stilted apology. I realize I might have been too hasty when I let you go, he said, eyes darting around as if searching for an escape hatch. You have to understand, I was under pressure to show results. I listened without nodding, arms folded. He stammered on. Look, I know you're in a position to make recommendations about this branch's future. We need your support. If you could just, maybe put in a good word, we can turn this around. I studied him, noticing how different he looked without the brash confidence. Gone was the smirk. In its place was a flicker of panic. He slid the folder across the table, hastily prepared charts detailing last-minute proposals. My expression remained neutral. I opened the folder out of courtesy and flipped through the pages, hastily thrown together projections, no real substance, just buzzwords like synergy and growth potential. When I glanced back up, Nathan was watching me with something akin to hope. He tried to pitch me again. I can fix this, I swear. I didn't realize who you were. If I had known. He trailed off, and I wondered what he meant by that. Did he regret my firing only because of my new position, or had he finally realized the value of my contributions? In response, I pulled out my own folder. Pages of documented mismanagement, client loss, vendor disputes, toxic leadership complaints, and a timeline showing the company's downward spiral since he'd taken over. The color drained from his face as he skimmed the contents. It doesn't look good, Nathan, I said, keeping my tone professional. I'm here to give my honest assessment, and the data speaks for itself. He opened his mouth to object, but no words came. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was thick with desperation. Please, he said, just help me. Recommend that we keep this office open. I can improve. I just need more time. I felt the weight of those words, and part of me remembered the sense of vulnerability I'd experienced on the day he fired me. But that memory only strengthened my resolve. It's not viable, I said gently but firmly. Keeping this branch operational under your leadership carries too high a risk. The data is conclusive. I slid my folder back toward him. His face fell, and for a brief moment I wondered if he finally understood the gravity of his actions. The layoffs, the lost contracts, the morale damage. He reached out as if to stop me, but I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. My mind flashed back to that humiliating morning when he smugly told me to pack my things in front of everyone. Now we were in a private room, but the finality of this moment felt just as potent. I added quietly, your best option is to begin your own exit strategy. That's my honest advice, because by tomorrow, the official recommendation will be on Elaine West's desk. Nathan swallowed hard, nodding ever so slightly. I saw in his eyes the realization that he had indeed lost everything he'd been so certain of. There was nothing more to say. True to my word, I submitted my evaluation the next day. The report highlighted irreparable damage to client relations, critical staff losses, and a culture of fear that stifled creativity. My recommendation was for the parent company to either merge operations with a more stable office or shut down the branch entirely. Within a week, the board made its decision. The branch would be shut down. It was a swift action, faster than I'd anticipated, but it signaled the company's urgency to move past this debacle. I had no illusions about the hardship this would cause some of my former colleagues, and I made sure my final memo included suggestions for reassigning the best talent to other branches. However, for Nathan Hale, there was no such lifeline. The official word was that he had been relieved of his position. In more human terms, he'd been fired, quietly pushed out with a severance package that likely paled in comparison to the damage he'd done. I heard through internal chatter that he tried to negotiate a better deal, but his bargaining power was gone. The wave of relief that washed over the remaining staff was tempered by the sorrow of seeing the doors close on a once proud office. A few days after the shutdown announcement, I received an email from a personal address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I realized it was from Nathan. The subject line read, "I'd appreciate a moment of your time." In the body, he apologized again, claiming he was blindsided by the culture clash, that he'd taken poor advice from certain board members, that he never intended to harm me personally. Then he pivoted to a request for assistance. Perhaps I could refer him to some other leadership role, or at least put in a good word with my connections at the parent company. I stared at the blinking cursor, deliberating how to respond. My initial reaction was to delete it without a second glance. But I decided to give it a day. Maybe compassion would find its way to me, or maybe it wouldn't. In the end, I never replied. I figured my silence would speak louder than any polite refusal. Nathan had made his bed the day he publicly humiliated me, and, ironically, his downfall arrived just as publicly. I closed the email, exhaled, and let that chapter end right there. Some consequences don't deserve a second chance. Life at the parent company soared to new heights for me. Elaine West officially appointed me to lead strategic projects across the entire region, not just the handful of offices I'd originally been assigned. I found myself guiding massive initiatives, from digital transformation efforts to innovative marketing campaigns that would shape the conglomerate's future. It felt like stepping onto a bigger stage with brighter lights, and I embraced the challenge wholeheartedly. My daily routine changed. I juggled high-stakes conference calls with forging new partnerships, negotiated budgets with board members, and traveled frequently to meet with teams in different locations. Yet, despite the hectic schedule, I felt more aligned with my purpose than ever. My phone lit up daily with messages of congratulations and queries from people who had watched my career grow. Some who witnessed my firing called to say they were inspired by how I'd carried myself with dignity that day. Hearing that made all the late nights and stressful decisions worthwhile. In quiet moments, I sometimes remembered the old office, the camaraderie we'd built under William Fowler, the day I packed my things under Nathan's watchful gaze. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it was an integral piece of my story. I walked through the halls of my new corporate home with confidence, greeting people with the same warmth I once displayed to my former team. I made it a personal mission to ensure that no one in the subsidiaries under my purview would ever feel the fear or humiliation I once did. Where Nathan Hale used intimidation, I employed mutual respect. Where he tore people down for minor mistakes, I encouraged open dialogue and constructive feedback. The results were evident: higher morale, increased productivity, and fewer internal conflicts. Reflecting on the journey, I realized something profound. The day Nathan fired me was the push I needed to ascend to a place where I could enact real change. My underdog status had transformed into a platform of influence. Justice had been served, not in some vengeful act of sabotage, but through the natural consequences of arrogance, meeting the immovable force of facts and integrity. My success wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that genuine leadership outlasts hollow bravado every time. Standing in my office one evening, I looked at the skyline and thought about how far I'd come. The humiliation was behind me. Now I was the architect of my own destiny. Looking back, I see the moral of this tale with crystalline clarity. Underestimating people based on ego or ignorance is a fatal flaw. Arrogance can blind even the most accomplished leader, making them forget that real power lies not in position alone, but in earned respect and knowledge. On that fateful day, my new boss fired me the moment he took over the company. He didn't know he would lose everything, and lose everything he did, because he never grasped the true value of the people he dismissed so casually. In contrast, I learned that self-respect, loyalty to colleagues, and the willingness to outgrow old roles can pave the way to higher ground. When one door closes in a cloud of humiliation, sometimes it only means a bigger door is about to open, if you have the courage and faith in your own worth to walk through it. That is the final lesson I carry with me. Arrogance loses. True loyalty and intelligence ultimately triumph. And in this story, the person who was once fired under flashing lights of public shame ended up standing in the spotlight of well-deserved success, proving that when you stand firm in who you are, no setback is truly final.